Hey guys, it's about 3:45 in the morning, and I just got my first cup of coffee for the day. I want to talk to you guys about something that was on my mind last night before I went to sleep, and so I'm going to call this video "Confessions of a Former Dispensationalist." Or mistakes of a former dispensationalist, I should say. Some issues or some things that popped in my mind when I was a dispensationalist, some things that I overlooked when interpreting the New Testament, and it caused a lot of confusion for me. And I wanted to save you guys this trouble from doing this as well. Is that one of the things dispensationalists do, which tends to distort your interpretation of the Bible, is they conflate the group of people known as the Jews. They conflate them with the whole of Israel, forgetting that most of the New Testament is actually reaching out to the northern kingdom that is scattered throughout all the nations, okay? So when they're reading the New Testament, a lot of times they're looking at the Jews as all of Israel, and then they're looking at the Gentiles as people who are not Israel. And that is just, it causes a lot of problems with their understanding of the Bible. And then they have to interpret certain parts of the Bible in weird ways just to accommodate their beliefs and their conflation and the confusion about Israel. One of the things here you'll see is the book of James, right? And in the book of James, it says at the very beginning, the greeting of the letter, it says, James, a servant of God and the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes, notice it says 12 tribes, which are scattered abroad, greeting. So the letter of James is written to the 12 tribes who are scattered abroad. And then it says, the second verse, he starts out with calling them my brethren. And you'll see a lot of that in the New Testament, brethren. The word brethren is not used in the sense that we think it's used today in church, where we're like brother and sister in the Lord or whatever. Brethren is used, if you look at the context of every time they use brethren, it's always talking about Israel or Israelites, or, people from the northern kingdom or people from the southern kingdom of Judea, right? Or Judah, okay? But anyway, so dispensationalists, they don't recognize the northern kingdom, or they count or conflate the people known as the Jews for all of Israel. When the Jews, we'll get into that later, but they're not even, a lot of the people who are called Jews are not even Israelites from the northern or southern kingdom. But anyway, we'll stick with the topic at hand here. So one of the mistakes they make is because they confuse the Jews and Israel, they have to account for this. So with James, they say that James is written to the future Jews during the time of tribulation after the rapture. So the book of James, according to dispensationalists, is written for a way far in the future group of people that they conflate with the Jews. They never account for the northern kingdom at all. Anyway, but if you look here, I think a very common sense interpretation of this, if you look at Acts chapter 8, it says in the very first verse, it says, And at that time, there was a great persecution against the church which was at Jerusalem, and they were all scattered abroad throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria, except the apostles. So essentially, the reason that they don't admit that maybe, just maybe, James was written to the 12 tribes scattered abroad, that were the people talking about in Acts chapter 8, who were the church scattered abroad during the Great Persecution. The reason they don't like to say that maybe that's when James was written, was when Acts chapter 8 was taking place, is because if they did that, they would have to admit that the church is used to describe the 12 tribes, right? A lot of people, that scares them. They hear that the church and the 12 tribes scattered abroad are the same thing. They start to freak out. But I think that's a more common sense interpretation of that verse than James chapter 2 was written to some people in the future, thousands of years from now or something, at that time. And it was written to the Jews, which they never take into account the northern kingdom. They never explain all of a sudden that there are 12 tribes scattered abroad. They only take into account the southern kingdom when they interpret the rest of the New Testament. Anyway, so I just wanted to, address that, because that's a huge mistake that's causing a lot of confusion when people read the New Testament, is they don't understand that the northern kingdom in the Old Testament, which are 10 tribes, the northern kingdom is scattered throughout all the nations. And in the New Testament, God is reaching out through his apostles. He is reaching out to that northern kingdom, to those 10 tribes that are scattered around through all the nations. And together, all of Israel are 12 tribes, if you combine the southern kingdom and the northern kingdom. And so that leaves for when people get to the New Testament, they automatically forget that the 10 tribes of the northern kingdom exist anymore, and they conflate Israel with the whole of Israel with the Jews that are mentioned frequently in the New Testament. So anyway, that was my confessions of a former dispensationalist, or mistakes of a former dispensationalist, is conflating Israel and the Jews. And then so you have to make up for a lot of interpretation issues when you don't count the northern kingdom. So then James, written to the 12 tribes, you have to go, okay, how does this work out? Blah, blah, blah. And then for some reason, they put these 12 tribes in the far future and conflate them again with the Jews versus Israel as a whole, as two nations. And then they can't admit that here in Acts chapter 8, it says, "At that time there was a great persecution against the church, which was at Jerusalem, and they were all scattered abroad throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria, except the apostles." So the church in Jerusalem is used in James chapter 8. It's called the 12 tribes of Israel, right? So there's a big problem with that with a lot of people, so they have to separate the two. But I think that James, the 12 tribes, and the church scattered abroad during the Great Persecution are talking about the same people. And basically the New Testament, and a lot of people, this scares them, but the New Testament is mainly written to Israel as a whole, and mostly reaching out to Israel, the northern kingdom from the Old Testament. The northern kingdom that was scattered throughout all the nations. Remember, the word nations just means, the word Gentiles just means nations. So when the New Testament says Gentiles, it doesn't exactly mean specifically people who are not Jewish. A lot of times what it's talking about the Israelites who are scattered throughout the nations. Anyway, just some funky interpretation issues and stuff like that when you conflate the Jews with all of Israel. I hope those thoughts came out clear in the video. Let me know what you guys think. Make some comments, whatever. Till later. Have a good one.